Hello everybody, thank you for joining me. This method of choosing my topics by looking at the days when famous people were born or died sometimes produces interesting coincidences, and today is one of them. Two of the great teachers of the medieval Christian church died on this day. The first was Anselm of Canterbury, who died on this day in 1109. He did a lot of thinking, a lot of it about the reason why Christ had to die, what's called the theory of the atonement. Up to that time, the idea had been basically called the ransom theory, which was that every time somebody sinned, they went over to the side of the devil, and a ransom had to be paid by God to the devil to get them back again. Very primitive indeed, but Anselm wanted to take it more deeply, and his theory is known as the sacrificial theory of the atonement. His idea was that God, very loving, but also a God of justice, who created a world where actions have consequences, and you couldn't have a world where people went around being sinful without there being some consequence. And the consequence was that somebody had to be punished. But because God was also a God of love, he didn't want to punish people, so he substituted them with Christ, whose death on the cross was the punishment that everybody else deserved. The idea, for me, it doesn't appeal at all. I can't imagine why God's love doesn't triumph his need for justice. After all, even human beings are capable of saying of an event, of something that was done wrong to them, I forgive, without demanding any recompense or substitutionary gift in exchange for the forgiveness. So Anselm's theory doesn't appeal. It certainly doesn't appeal in the modern form, which instead of saying the problem is that God is both a God of God and a God of justice, says that God is a God of love and a God who gets angry. and it's become a sort of idea that Christ's death has to somehow appease God's anger. Not an idea I like at all. The other Christian thinker whose death occurred on this day but in 1142 was Peter Abelard. His notion was that Christ died, and he calls it the moral influence theory. Christ died in order to influence us, to help us to realise how much we're loved. His emphasis is on God who loves us, who cares for us, who's generous towards us, a God who wants to forgive. But the problem is that we don't receive forgiveness. We don't believe that we are forgiven. And so something needed to happen to persuade us that we are forgiven, that we are really loved. And so his idea of the cross is that it was in order to influence in that way that Christ died. Personally, much more congenial way of thinking about it. Though, of course, it was not the one that was adopted by the Christian Church. Today is not the Saint's Day of St. Peter Abelard. It is the Saint's Day for St. Anselm of Canterbury. It was his idea, his sacrificial theory, which won the day, and which for centuries and in a variety of forms became the standard way of thinking about why Christ died.